How did a civilization survive the edge of the world in a place where the air itself wants to kill you? When we think of Vikings, we imagine dragon-headed ships and blood-stained axes. But their greatest raid wasn't against a monastery in England, it was against the Arctic winter itself. Imagine a house with no windows, no chimney, and a living room shared with 20 lowing cows. To a modern architect, it sounds like a nightmare. To a Viking, it was a high-performance thermal fortress. In this episode, we're stripping away the myth to reveal the brutal, brilliant engineering of the Viking Longhouse. We'll discover how they turned 900 tons of frozen earth into a living insulation, why they use smoke as a structural preservative, and how they hacked the laws of physics to stay warmer. Forget everything you know about primitive cabins. We are going inside a machine built for the end of the world. Are you ready to see how the North was truly won? Let's dive in. Imagine walking into a multi-million-dollar Manhattan penthouse today, only to find 20 cows standing in your living room. You'd call it madness. A Viking would call it smart home technology. In the dead of a Scandinavian winter, when the mercury plummeted to minus 30 degrees Celsius, minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, survival wasn't about comfort, it was about BT us. And the Vikings discovered a carbon-neutral, 24/7 heating system that required zero firewood, the livestock. The Longhouse was never just a home for humans, it was a high-tech biological ark. The floor plan was a masterclass in thermal zoning. About half of the structure, the fuse, Outperformed, was dedicated to cattle, sheep, and goats. But there was no airtight wall separating the master bedroom from the stable. Instead, a simple wooden partition acted as a semi-permeable membrane. A single mature cow is essentially a 1,000-watt space heater. It breathes, moves, and ruminates, constantly radiating body heat. Pack 15 or 20 of them into an enclosed, insulated space, and you've just installed a massive central heating unit. Because of the law of convection, the warm air would naturally rise and drift toward the slightly elevated living quarters. For the modern American, the trade-off seems repulsive, the stench of manure and the constant lowing of beasts. But to a Viking family, that smell was the scent of survival. It meant their living radiators were healthy and the house wouldn't freeze. The humans provided shelter from the wolves and the wind, and in exchange, the animals kept the humans from freezing to death. This wasn't savagery, it was an ingenious engineering solution that eliminated the need for a 24-hour fire, saving precious fuel for the darkest months. If the livestock provided the steady, low-frequency warmth of a biological battery, the Longfire, Langgelder, was the house's high-voltage power plant. In a world without light switches or double-pane glass, this wasn't just a campfire on the floor, it was a 40-foot-long industrial furnace. The Viking hearth was a masterstroke of thermal mass engineering. It wasn't a compact fireplace tucked into a corner. It was a shallow, elongated trench stretching down the central axis of the living quarters. Lined with massive stones, this hearth acted as a thermal battery. During the day, the stones absorbed the intense radiant heat of the wood or peat fire. At night, long after the last ember faded, those stones continued to radiate warmth, smoothing out the temperature spikes of the Arctic night. But the hearth solved a problem more psychological than physical: the darkness. In a Viking longhouse, windows were non-existent. They were literally holes in the armor. For 6 months, the sun was a stranger. The only lumens available came from the flickering orange glow of the Langgelder. This central fire dictated the entire social architecture of the home. The higher status members sat on raised wooden platforms closest to the light, while the smoke-stained rafters above held the family's cured meats. This was the original open-concept living. Here, the heat of the fire didn't just cook the porridge or roast the venison, it forged the community. In the semi-darkness, illuminated only by the rhythmic pulse of the flames, the Vikings told the sagas that would define their history. The hearth was the only thing standing between a thriving civilization and the crushing, frozen void of the North. It was more than a heater, it was the sun, brought indoors to defy the gods of winter. In a modern home, smoke is a life-threatening emergency. In a Viking longhouse, smoke was a preservative. This is the most counterintuitive part of Nordic engineering. They lived in a house without a chimney, and that was a deliberate, genius choice. If you looked up from the central hearth, you wouldn't see a brick flue. Instead, you'd see a thick, acrid layer of peat smoke hovering just above head height. The Vikings designed their roofs with a high pitch for a reason, to create a smoke reservoir. This black cloud acted as a biological shield. The hot, carbon-rich smoke constantly cured the wooden rafters and thatch, killing wood-boring beetles and preventing rot in a climate where dampness was a constant enemy. It was a 24/7 automatic maintenance system for the building's skeleton. But how did they breathe? The secret was the Leora, a precision-engineered roof vent. Positioned at the highest point, the Leora wasn't just a hole, it was an adjustable valve controlled by a long pole from the hearth. A Viking ventilation officer, usually the head of the household, would adjust a wooden shutter to find the perfect equilibrium. They played a high-stakes game of thermal balance. Open the Leora too wide, and the precious heat from the animal battery and the hearth would vanish into the Arctic sky. Close it too tight, and the family would suffocate. A home that was smoky, dim, and heavy, but crucially, warm. By sacrificing air quality for thermal retention, the Vikings turned their ceiling into a massive radiator. The smoke didn't just preserve the wood, it trapped the heat, reflecting it back down onto the family. It was a brutal, brilliant trade-off that kept their civilization alive while the rest of the world froze. If you were a scout searching for a Viking settlement in midwinter, you might walk right over a house without ever seeing it. The Longhouse wasn't just on the land, it became the land. This was the final layer of their thermal defense, the living roof. The roof of a longhouse was a multi-ton engineering marvel. On top of the heavy timber rafters, the Vikings laid sheets of birch bark, nature's original waterproofing. But the real magic was the turf. They stacked thick blocks of living earth and grass, creating a 2-foot-thick thermal blanket. In the spring, these roofs were green meadows. In the winter, they became the ultimate heat trap. But then, the Vikings' greatest enemy, right, the snow. While modern homeowners dread heavy snowfall, the Vikings welcomed it. They understood a secret of physics that we often forget. Snow is 90% trapped air. It is one of nature's most efficient insulators. The long, sloping shape of the roof was designed to catch the drifts. As the blizzards raged, the snow would pile up against the thick turf walls, eventually burying the entire structure. The house transformed into a thermal cocoon. Under 10 feet of snow, the outside temperature might be minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, but against the turf walls, it stayed a constant, stable 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius. The snow acted as a massive buffer, sealing every microscopic crack and killing the wind's ability to steal heat. Inside this white hill, the community sat in the orange glow of the hearth, listening to the muffled roar of the storm outside. They didn't fight the Arctic. They let the Arctic wrap them in a warm, frozen embrace. If the walls were the armor, the doors were the Achilles heel. Every time a door opens in minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit weather, a house loses hours of accumulated heat in seconds. To a Viking, an open door was a security breach. Their solution? The world's first thermal airlock system. First, look at the door itself. It wasn't the grand towering entrance of a cathedral. It was tiny, thick, and low. You didn't just walk in, you had to bow. This wasn't just about showing respect to the homeowner, it was a clever trick of physics. By keeping the doorway small and low, the Vikings minimized the volume of cold air that could rush in. They effectively created a heavy air barrier at the threshold. But the real genius lay in the vestibule. Most longhouses featured a double-door system. You stepped into a small, unheated transition chamber, a buffer zone. You closed the outer heavy oak door behind you before opening the inner door to the living quarters. This heat trap ensured that the sub-zero Arctic wind never had a direct path to the central hearth. Even the placement of these doors was a masterclass in aerodynamics. You would almost never find a door on the short-end walls, which faced the brunt of the northern gales. Instead, the entrances were hidden on the long curved sides. Remember the ship-like shape of the house? Those curved walls weren't for aesthetics. They allowed the wind to flow around the structure like water around a hull, rather than slamming into a flat surface. By the time the wind reached the door, its kinetic energy was spent. The Vikings didn't just build a house, they built a streamlined fortress that outsmarted the wind. As we look back at the Viking longhouse, we see more than just a primitive shelter of wood and earth. We see a masterpiece of integrated engineering. It was a system where every variable, the heat from a cow's breath, the acrid smoke of peat, the weight of the spring turf, and even the crushing Arctic snow was calculated and repurposed. The Vikings didn't survive the North by fighting nature. They survived by becoming part of it. They understood that in the face of a sub-zero void, the only way to thrive was to build a home that breathed, aged, and functioned like a living creature. Today, as we struggle with rising energy costs and complex HVAC systems, perhaps the greatest secret the Vikings left us isn't their weaponry or their ships. It's the wisdom of the thermal fortress, the idea that a truly sustainable home isn't one that shuts the world out, but one that invites the world's elements in to work for us. If you found this deep dive into ancient engineering fascinating, hit the like button and tell us in the comments. Could you trade your modern apartment for a smoky, warm, living Viking ark? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more journeys into the hidden technologies of the past. Until next time, stay curious and stay warm.